3 years of marriage, 7 months pregnant, and exactly 5 minutes to pack her life into a garbage bag. That was the reality for Samuel Sterling on a freezing Tuesday night in Seattle. Her husband, Mark, didn't just leave her, he kicked her out onto the street to make room for his younger, wealthier mistress. He called Samuel a financial burden and a parasite. He laughed as she walked into the rain. But Mark made a fatal calculation that night. He didn't know that the woman he was discarding wasn't just a housewife. He had no idea that the poor orphan he married was actually the sole heiress to the Vance logistics empire, sitting on a dormant trust fund worth $18 million. And she was about to wake it up. The thunder over the suburbs of Bellevue rattled the windows of the modest 2-bedroom house at 42 Oakwood Drive. Inside, the air was thicker than the storm outside. Samuel Sterling wiped her hands on her apron, her heart hammering against her ribs. She glanced at the clock on the microwave. 8:15 p.m. Mark was late again. The pot roast, his favorite, had gone cold on the counter an hour ago. At 7 months pregnant, Samuel's back ached constantly. She sat heavily on the dining chair, rubbing her swollen belly. "It's okay, little bean," she whispered. "Daddy's just working hard for us." She wanted to believe that. She needed to believe that. For the past 6 months, Mark had been distant. He was a mid-level marketing manager at a tech firm, obsessed with appearances and status. Samuel, who worked as a freelance copy editor and handled all the household chores, had lately become invisible to him. Or worse, an irritation. The sound of the front door unlocking made her jump. She put on her best smile and waddled toward the hallway. "Mark, you're home. I kept dinner Samuel stopped. Mark wasn't alone. Standing next to him, shaking a wet designer umbrella onto Samuel's freshly mopped floor, was Jessica Thorne. Samuel knew her. Jessica was the new account executive at Mark's firm. She was everything Samuel currently felt she wasn't: sharp, expensive, and ruthlessly manicured. "Jessica," Samuel blinked, confused. Is this a work meeting?" Mark didn't take off his coat. He looked at Samuel with a detached, cold expression that sent a shiver down her spine, darker than the November chill. "No, Samuel. It's not a meeting." Mark stepped forward, placing a hand on the small of Jessica's back. "We need to talk. Sit down." Samuel didn't move. "Why is she here, Mark?" "Because this concerns her," Mark said, his voice flat. "I'm done, Samuel. I want a divorce." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What?" "Mark, I'm having our son in 2 months. You can't be serious." "I am deadly serious," Mark snapped, his patience evaporating. "Look at you, Samuel. Look at this house. It's depressing. I'm rising in the company. I need a partner who fits my trajectory, not someone who sits around in sweatpants counting coupons." Jessica smirked, looking around the living room with disdain. "Mark told me you were pathetic, but he didn't mention the smell. Is that pot roast? God, how 1950s. I supported you while you got your MBA." Samuel's voice shook, tears welling in her eyes. "I paid the rent for 2 years while you were an intern. How can you do this?" "That's ancient history," Mark dismissed her, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This house is in my name. I bought it before we married. I've spoken to my lawyer. You have no claim to it." "You're kicking me out?" Samuel gasped, clutching her stomach. "Tonight? It's pouring rain, Mark." "Jessica is moving in tonight," Mark stated, as if discussing a furniture delivery. "I don't want you here when we wake up. You have, let's say, until Jessica finishes her glass of wine to get your things." Samuel looked at the man she had loved for 4 years, the man she had hidden her true self from because she wanted to be sure, absolutely sure, that he loved her for her, not her background. "You're making a mistake, Mark," Samuel said quietly. The tears stopped. A strange, cold clarity washed over her. "The only mistake I made was marrying a nobody with zero ambition," Mark sneered. "Here." He threw a wad of cash onto the floor. It scattered near her feet. "That's $500. Take a cab to a motel. Don't come back." Jessica laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound. "Take the money, honey. You're going to need diapers." Samuel looked at the money. Then she looked at Mark. She didn't bend down to pick it up. "I don't want your money, Mark." "Suit yourself." He turned his back on her, walking Jessica toward the master bedroom. Their bedroom. "You have 10 minutes before I call the police for trespassing." Samuel moved mechanically. She went to the guest room, grabbed a duffel bag, and packed the essentials. 2 changes of clothes, her prenatal vitamins, her laptop, and a small, battered leather journal she had kept hidden in the back of her sock drawer. She walked to the front door. Mark and Jessica were already popping a bottle of champagne in the kitchen. "Goodbye, Mark," Samuel said softly. He didn't even turn around. Samuel stepped out into the freezing rain, the door slamming shut behind her. The sound echoed like a gunshot, signaling the death of her old life. She stood on the curb, soaked to the bone within seconds, looking back at the warm glow of the windows. She was homeless. She was pregnant. But as she gripped the handle of her bag, Samuel Sterling reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone. She didn't call a taxi. She dialed a number she hadn't used in 5 years. The rain blurred the neon sign of the Starlight Motel, a run-down establishment on the outskirts of the city, known for hourly rates and thin walls. It was the only place within walking distance. Samuel sat on the edge of the sagging mattress in room 104. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. Her clothes were dripping onto the carpet. She was shivering, not just from the cold, but from the shock. The baby kicked, a strong, sharp thud against her ribs. "I know," she soothed, her hand trembling as she touched her belly. "I'm sorry. I promise. This is the last time you will ever be cold." She opened the battered leather journal she had saved. Inside wasn't a diary, but a collection of contacts and account numbers written in code. Samuel's maiden name wasn't actually Smith, as Mark believed. It was Vance. She was the granddaughter of Arthur Vance, the shipping magnate who had controlled the freight lines from Seattle to Anchorage. When her parents died in a plane crash when she was 12, her grandfather had raised her with strict, almost paranoid discipline. "Money makes people monsters, Ellie," Arthur had told her on his deathbed. "Don't let them see the gold. Let them see the girl. If they love the girl, then they deserve the gold." She had taken his advice to the extreme. She legally changed her name. She lived simply. She worked normal jobs. She met Mark, and she thought she had found someone who loved the girl. She was wrong. She picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over the contact labeled Mr. Henderson. It rang twice. "Hello," a grueling, elderly voice answered. It was 9:30 p.m., but Charles Henderson, the executor of the Vance estate, never slept. "Charles," Samuel said. Her voice was stronger now. The weeping wife was gone. The heiress was surfacing. There was a pause on the line. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Miss Samuel? Is that you? We haven't heard from you since the wedding. I need you to activate the protocols, Charles." "The full protocols, ma'am?" Charles sounded stunned. "That involves unfreezing the primary holding accounts. The liquidity alone is substantial. Has something happened?" "Mark threw me out," Samuel said, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. He moved his mistress in. He left his unborn son on the street in the rain. "Good God," Charles whispered. The lawyer in him instantly took over. "Where are you? I'm sending the car. I'm sending the security team. No, Samuel stopped him. Not yet. I need to handle this my way. If I show up in a limousine now, he'll just fight me for the money. He'll try to get custody just for the child support. Smart, Charles agreed. The prenup you insisted on, the one he refused to sign because he thought you were poor, actually works in your favor now. He has no claim to your premarital assets, provided we can prove the timeline. I need access to the emergency funds tonight, Charles, just enough to get a safe apartment. But Charles... Yes, Miss Samuel. I want to know everything about Mark's company. TechCore Solutions, right? I believe so. It's a mid-sized firm. Why? Who owns the building they operate in? Charles typed furiously on a keyboard in the background. Give me a moment. It looks like a commercial real estate group called Apex Holdings. And who owns Apex Holdings, Charles? A pause. Well, technically, you do, ma'am. It's a subsidiary of Vance Logistics. You own 60% of the commercial district in downtown Seattle. You just haven't attended a board meeting in 4 years. A cold, grim smile touched Samuel's lips for the first time that night. It's time for a board meeting, Charles. I'll have the papers drawn up. Miss Samuel, are you sure you want to go to war? Samuel looked down at her stomach. She thought about Mark's sneer. She thought about Jessica drinking champagne in the house Samuel had cleaned, cooked in, and made a home. He wanted a woman with ambition, Samuel said softly. I'm going to show him exactly what ambition looks like. Release $50,000 to my debit card. And Charles, buy the debt on Mark's car. I want to be the one holding the title. Consider it done. Welcome back, Miss Vance. Samuel hung up. She stood up and walked to the dirty bathroom mirror. Her mascara was running. Her hair was a mess, and she looked exhausted. But the eyes staring back weren't the eyes of a victim anymore. She washed her face. She took a deep breath. The next morning, Mark Sterling would wake up thinking he had successfully trimmed the fat from his life. He would go to work, laugh with Jessica, and brag to his buddies. He didn't know that the fat he trimmed was the only thing keeping him afloat. The game had changed, and Mark was playing checkers while Samuel owned the chessboard. The sun streamed into the master bedroom of 42 Oakwood Drive, hitting Mark Sterling in the face. He groaned, rolling over to reach for Samuel. His hand hit empty space. For a split second, panic flared in his chest. Habit. Then, memory washed over him. He wasn't married to the dowdy pregnant burden anymore. He was free. He smiled, stretching his arms. Beside him, Jessica was still asleep, her blonde hair fanned out over the pillow like a halo. Finally, Mark muttered to himself. A life worth living. He got out of bed, expecting the smell of coffee and bacon. That was Samuel's routine. Up at 6 a.m., breakfast on the table by 7 wars. But the kitchen was silent and cold. The sink was piled high with dirty champagne flutes and takeout containers from the night before. Mark frowned. He opened the fridge. Empty, except for a bottle of expensive sparkling water and a tub of yogurt. Babe? Jessica's voice drifted from the bedroom, groggy and demanding. Mark? Can you bring me a latte? Soy milk, no foam. Mark suppressed a sigh. We don't have an espresso machine, Jess. Samuel just used a drip pot. Ugh. Jessica appeared in the doorway, wrapped in Samuel's favorite silk robe, one Mark had bought her for an anniversary 2 years ago. Seeing Jessica in it felt strange, but Mark pushed the guilt down. Well, we need to buy one, and we need to get rid of this furniture. It smells like domestic desperation. I want everything mid-century modern. White leather. Sure, babe, Mark said, checking his watch. "I'll put it on the credit card. I'm expecting that promotion to senior director next week anyway. The raise will cover it." "It better," Jessica said, walking past the mess in the kitchen without lifting a finger. "I'm not living in a dump." While Mark was scraping together a meager breakfast of toast and instant coffee across the city, a very different morning was unfolding. The Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Seattle, the presidential suite. Samuel sat on a velvet chaise lounge overlooking the Puget Sound. The rain had stopped, leaving the city scrubbed clean and bright. She wore a plush white bathrobe, but unlike the one Jessica was currently wearing, this one cost more than Mark's car. A knock came at the door. "Enter," Samuel said calmly. A team of 3 people walked in. First was Charles Henderson, her lawyer. Second was a stern-looking woman in a sharp suit, Margaret Vane, a personal stylist. Third was a private investigator named Silas. "Good morning, Miss Vance," Charles said, bowing slightly. "Your new identification is ready. The bank accounts are unfrozen. The total liquid assets available to you immediately are 18 million, with the remaining trust assets in real estate and stocks totaling, well, significantly more." Samuel took the black debit card Charles offered. It felt heavy, cold. "Thank you, Charles. And the housing situation?" "The penthouse at the Meridian Tower is being prepped. It's fully furnished. You can move in tonight." Samuel nodded, turning to the stylist. "Margaret, I need a new wardrobe. Nothing that looks like a suburban housewife. I need armor. I want to look like I own the building, not like I'm visiting it." Margaret nodded, eyeing Samuel's pregnant form. "We can do high-fashion maternity, structured blazers, tailored dresses, power colors, navy, black, emerald. By the time I'm done with you, no one will dare interrupt you." "Good." Samuel turned to Silas, the PI. "What do you have?" Silas placed a folder on the coffee table. "Photos of Mark and Jessica this morning. They threw out 3 bags of your clothes. They're currently browsing furniture online. Mark applied for a credit limit increase on his Visa card at 8:45 a.m. Did he get it?" "No," Silas smirked, "because the co-signer on that card was you, and since you flagged your credit as compromised last night per Charles's instructions, the bank froze the account." Samuel took a sip of her herbal tea. "He's going to be embarrassed when he tries to pay for lunch." "There's more," Silas said. "Mark is under the impression he is getting a promotion, but I dug into TechCore's internal communications. His boss, David Ross, is actually looking to downsize the marketing department. Mark isn't in line for a promotion. He's on the short list for a layoff." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "No, we can't let him be laid off. Not yet." Charles looked confused. "Why not? Let him lose his job. Ideally, he ends up on the street." "If he loses his job now, he's just a victim of the economy," Samuel said, standing up. She walked to the window. "He'll blame bad luck. He'll play the martyr. I don't want him to be a victim. I want him to be a failure. I want him to know that he had everything and lost it because of his own incompetence." She turned back to the group, her eyes blazing. "Charles, you said Vance Logistics owns the building TechCore operates in?" "Yes, Miss Vance. We hold the lease." "And the lease is up for renewal next month, isn't it?" "It is." "Contact TechCore's CEO. Tell him that Apex Holdings, my company, is reviewing the tenancy. Tell them we are sending a special consultant to audit their efficiency before we agree to renew the lease. And tell them," Samuel smiled, a dangerous, shark-like smile. "Tell them the consultant's name is Samuel Vance, but don't send a photo." Charles's eyes widened. "You're going in there?" "I'm going to become his boss, Charles. I'm going to make him work for me. And when he fails, I'm going to be the one to fire him." 3 days later, The atmosphere at 42 Oakwood Drive was toxic. "Card declined," Jessica screeched, standing in the middle of a high-end furniture store. "Mark, this is humiliating. The sales clerk is looking at me like I'm a pauper." Mark was sweating profusely, talking into his cell phone. "I don't understand. I pay the bill every month. What do you mean, security freeze? Who authorized it?" "The primary account holder, sir," the bank representative said blandly. "Mrs. Samuel Sterling." Mark hung up, his face red with rage. "That witch!" he hissed. "She froze the joint cards." "You said she was a nobody," Jessica snapped. "You said she was a broke orphan. How does she have the power to freeze your accounts?" "It's just a technicality," Mark lied, trying to grab Jessica's arm. She pulled away. "I'll fix it. I'll transfer money from my savings." But when Mark checked his savings, he felt a knot in his stomach. The divorce lawyer he had retained, a shark named Heavy Hitter, required a $10,000 retainer. Jessica's tastes over the last 3 days had cost another $3,000. He was bleeding cash. "Just, let's come back later," Mark muttered, guiding a fuming Jessica out of the store. They walked to the parking lot. Mark pressed the unlock button on his key fob for his BMW 5 Series. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Nothing. "Oh my God, Mark," Jessica groaned. "Does anything in your life actually work?" Mark walked up to the car. There was a bright yellow metal boot clamped onto the front tire. A neon orange sticker was plastered on the driver's side window. "Repossession order." "What?" Mark stared at the sticker. "I haven't missed a payment." He called the financing company, screaming into the phone. "This is a mistake. I'm Mark Sterling. I demand you take this boot off." "One moment, Mr. Sterling," the agent said. "Ah, yes. I see here that the debt on this vehicle was purchased by a third-party holding company yesterday, Vance Asset Management. They have called in the loan. The terms state that if the loan is called, the full balance, $45,000, is due immediately. Since it wasn't paid, they ordered repossession." "Vance Asset Management?" Mark was baffled. "I've never heard of them. Why would they buy my car loan?" "I don't know, sir, but you need to vacate the vehicle. The tow truck is en route." Jessica was tapping her foot, her arms crossed. "So no furniture, no money, and now, no car. Are we taking the bus, Mark? Is that the trajectory you were talking about?" "It's a glitch," Mark yelled, slamming his hand on the hood. "Someone is messing with me." He didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street with tinted windows. Inside, Samuel watched through a pair of sunglasses. She stroked her belly. "Strike one," she whispered. Mark had to call an Uber. The ride home was silent. When they got back, Jessica went straight to the bedroom and slammed the door. Mark sat on the couch, the old sagging couch he hated, and put his head in his hands. He needed a win. He needed that promotion at work. If he got the senior director position, the bonus would clear the car debt and get Jessica off his back. His phone buzzed. An email from work. Subject: urgent. All staff meeting from David Ross, CEO TechCore team. Please assemble in the main conference room tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Our building landlords, Apex Holdings, are conducting a high-level audit of our operations. This audit will determine if our lease is renewed. The representative from Apex, Ms. Vance, will be observing all departments. Appearance and performance are critical. Mark, I need you to lead the presentation on our Q4 marketing strategy. This needs to be flawless." Mark read the email and exhaled. This was it. This was his chance to shine. He didn't care about some landlord audit. He cared that the CEO chose him to present. "Ms. Vance," Mark muttered. "Probably some old crone with a clipboard. I can charm her. I can charm anyone." He stood up, his confidence returning. He was Mark Sterling. He was handsome, charismatic, and good at his job. He would nail this presentation, save the lease, get the promotion, and fix this mess. He had no idea that Miss Vance was currently reviewing his personnel file, highlighting every missed deadline and expense report error in red ink. The next morning, TechCore Solutions was buzzing with nervous energy. The sleek glass offices in downtown Seattle were usually relaxed, but today everyone was in suits. Mark walked in, wearing his best charcoal suit. Luckily, he had picked it up from the dry cleaners before kicking Samuel out. He looked sharp. He felt ready. "Hey, Mark," a junior associate, Kevin, whispered by the coffee machine. "Did you hear? The Apex representative arrived an hour ago. She's in with the CEO now. Rumor is she's terrifying." Mark laughed, pouring himself a black coffee. "Terrifying? Kevin, they're property managers. They care about broken elevators and HVAC systems. I'll dazzle her with the growth charts. She'll sign the lease, and we'll be heroes." "I don't know, man." Kevin looked pale. "I saw her walk by. She didn't look like a property manager. She looked like royalty, and she's pregnant." Mark froze. The coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "Pregnant?" "Yeah, like heavily pregnant. But she was wearing these heels. I don't know how she does it." A weird feeling settled in Mark's gut. Pregnant. Just like Samuel. But Samuel was a frump. Samuel wore oversized sweaters and leggings with holes in the knees. Samuel couldn't navigate a corporate boardroom if her life depended on it. "It's just a coincidence," Mark told himself. "Lots of women are pregnant." "Mark!" David Ross, the CEO, poked his head out of the conference room. He looked sweaty. "Get in here. She wants to start the marketing review early." Mark straightened his tie, flashed his winning smile, and strutted toward the double-glass doors. Showtime. He walked into the conference room. It was a long table. At the head sat David Ross. To his right were the other executives. At the far end, facing the door, sat a woman. The chair was turned slightly away, looking at the view of the city. All Mark could see was a cascade of dark, glossy hair and the sleeve of an emerald green power suit. "Miss Vance," David Ross said, his voice trembling slightly. "This is Mark Sterling, our marketing manager. He'll be walking you through our customer acquisition strategy." The chair slowly swiveled around. Mark prepared his opening line, a joke to break the ice. The words died in his throat. His portfolio slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a loud slap. The face staring back at him was familiar. The cheekbones, the eyes, the lips. But everything else was different. The makeup was flawless, accentuating a sharpness he had never seen. The hair was blown out in a style that screamed wealth. The emerald suit fit her body perfectly, highlighting the baby bump with elegance rather than hiding it. And on her neck, resting against her throat, was a diamond necklace that Mark knew, just by looking at it, cost more than his entire life's earnings. It was Samuel. But it wasn't the Samuel he knew. The warmth was gone from her eyes. In its place was a cold, dark abyss. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Samuel said. Her voice was smooth, professional, and utterly detached. She didn't blink. She didn't acknowledge that she had washed his underwear 4 days ago. Samuel," Mark stammered. The room went dead silent. David Ross looked between them. "You know each other?" Samuel smiled. It was the same shark smile she had given Charles. "Mr. Sterling is my soon-to-be ex-husband. But that is a personal matter, David. I am here for business, and frankly, your marketing manager is already wasting my time." He dropped his papers. Mark scrambled to pick up the portfolio, his hands shaking violently. His brain was misfiring. Samuel? Rich? Apex Holdings? What is happening? I... Mark stood up, clutching the papers. Samuel, what are you doing here? I am Ms. Vance to you in this room, Mr. Sterling, she snapped. The command in her voice cracked like a whip. I own Apex Holdings, which means I own this building, which means I decide if you have an office to come to tomorrow. Now, present your data. And it better be good. Because I noticed a 15% drop in Q3 retention, and I'm curious how you plan to explain that. Mark felt like he was in a nightmare. He looked at the slide deck on the screen. It was the presentation he had worked on all night. Go on, Mark, David Ross hissed. Present, Mark tried. He really tried. So, if you look at slide 1, we, engaged in a targeted ad campaign. Targeted to whom? Samuel interrupted. She didn't look at the screen. She looked directly at him. Because according to my audit of your budget, you spent $50,000 on influencers who have less than 10,000 followers. That seems like a misappropriation of funds. Or perhaps incompetence? It was a branding exercise. Mark defended himself, sweat dripping down his temple. It was a waste, Samuel countered. She opened a folder in front of her. I also see here that you expensed a dinner at Le Monde last Tuesday. The receipt lists client meeting. But the guest count was 2, and the order included a bottle of Dom Perignon. Mark went pale. That was the dinner he took Jessica to the night before he kicked Samuel out. Who was the client, Mr. Sterling? Samuel asked, her voice dangerously soft. It was a prospective lead, Mark lied. Really? Samuel pulled a piece of paper from her folder. Because I called the restaurant. They have the reservation under Mark and girlfriend. Is lying on expense reports standard practice at TechCore, David? David Ross looked like he was about to have a stroke. Mark, explain yourself. It was a mistake, Mark shouted, his composure shattering. She's doing this on purpose. David, she's my wife. She's vindictive because I left her. Samuel stood up. The movement was graceful, despite her size. She placed both hands on the table. I am not vindictive, Mr. Sterling. I am a businesswoman, and I see a liability. You are financially irresponsible with company money, just as you were with your household finances. You lack strategic foresight. And frankly, she looked him up and down with disdain. Your suit is cheap. She turned to David Ross. David, I am willing to renew the lease for TechCore, but I have conditions. Apex Holdings requires that all tenant companies maintain a high standard of ethical employment. We cannot house companies that employ liars or thieves. David Ross didn't hesitate, not even for a second. Mark, David said, his voice cold. Pack your things. What? Mark gasped. You can't fire me. I've been here 5 years. You falsified expense reports, David said. That's cause for immediate termination. Get out. Security will escort you. Mark looked at Samuel. He wanted to scream. He wanted to beg. But the woman looking back at him wasn't his wife. She was a titan. You ruined me, Mark whispered. Samuel leaned in close, so only he could hear. You threw me out in the rain, Mark. I just returned the favor. Now get out of my building. Security escorted Mark out of the TechCore building. They didn't let him pack his personal items. They handed him a cardboard box with his mug and a framed photo of Jessica. He stood on the sidewalk, the bustling city moving around him, feeling completely numb. He checked his phone. 11:30 a.m. He had no job, no car, his credit cards were frozen, and he had to go home and tell Jessica. Mark walked. It took him 2 hours to get back to Bellevue on foot and by bus, a mode of transport he hadn't used since college. By the time he unlocked the front door of 42 Oakwood Drive, he was sweaty, disheveled, and furious. He expected to find Jessica angry about the car. Instead, he found the front door wide open. Jess? He walked in. The living room was empty, literally. The TV was gone. The few pieces of nice furniture he owned were gone. Even the decorative lamps were missing. He ran to the bedroom. Jessica was there, aggressively stuffing her clothes into 3 large suitcases. A man Mark didn't recognize, a muscular guy in a tight t-shirt, was carrying Mark's expensive golf clubs out the door. "What is going on?" Mark yelled. "Who is this guy? Why are you packing?" Jessica didn't look up. She zipped a suitcase shut with a violent yank. "I'm leaving, Mark. Obviously. Leaving? Because of the car? Babe, it's a misunderstanding. I can fix it." Jessica spun around, her eyes cold. "It's not just the car, Mark. I saw the news." "What news?" She pulled out her phone and shoved it in his face. It was a push notification from the Seattle Business Chronicle. The headline read, "Vance Harris retakes control. Samuel Vance ousts TechCore management in surprise audit." The article detailed everything. Samuel's true identity, the $18 million trust fund, the commercial empire, and in a humiliating footnote, it mentioned that the former husband was removed from the premises for financial misconduct. "You knew," Jessica hissed. "You must have known she was rich." "I didn't," Mark stammered. "I swear, she told me she was an orphan with nothing." "Then you're an idiot," Jessica scoffed. "You threw away $18 million for..." "What? For a marketing salary? And now you don't even have that. I called your office, Mark. They told me you were fired for fraud." "I was framed." "I don't care," Jessica screamed. "I'm not staying with a broke, jobless loser who is about to get sued by a billionaire. Do you have any idea how bad this looks for my brand?" Mark felt the room spin. "But I thought you loved me. We were going to build a life." Jessica laughed. It was the same cruel laugh she had used on Samuel, but now it cut Mark to the bone. "Mark, look at yourself. You're 32. You rent this house. You have debt. And now you have a criminal record for fraud. I dated you because you were convenient and you bought me things. Now, you're just dead weight." She signaled to the muscular guy. "Brad, grab the jewelry box." "Wait, that's my grandmother's ring." Mark lunged for the box. Brad shoved Mark backward. Mark tripped over his own feet and landed hard on the floor. "Consider it severance pay for wasting my time," Jessica sneered. She stepped over his legs. "Goodbye, Mark. Don't call me." The door slammed. Mark heard a car engine rev. A Porsche, judging by the sound. Brad's car. Mark lay on the floor of the empty house. The silence was deafening. 3 days ago, he had a wife who cooked for him, rubbed his back, and loved him unconditionally. He had a job. He had a future. Now, he had nothing. But as he lay there, a dark, desperate thought began to form in his mind. Samuel was rich. Extremely rich. And they were technically still married. He sat up. A frantic, greedy grin spread across his face. "She can't just leave me," he whispered. "Washington is a community property state. I'm entitled to half. I'm entitled to everything." The silence in the empty house at 42 Oakwood Drive was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and screamed of failure. Mark Sterling sat on the floor where he had fallen, staring at the spot where his television used to be. The dust outlines of his former life were the only furniture left. Jessica was gone. The BMW was gone. His job was gone. For 48 hours, Mark existed in a fugue state of self-pity and rage. He drank tap water because he couldn't afford bottled. He ate a stale box of crackers he found in the back of the pantry. He paced the hardwood floors, muttering to himself, replaying the last week in a loop. How had it gone so wrong? How had the quiet, mousy woman he married turned into a corporate leviathan that swallowed his life whole? It wasn't fair. That was the thought that circled his brain like a shark. It wasn't fair. He had given Samuel 3 years of his life. He had given her a roof over her head. Sure, the house was in his name, and sure, he made her pay for the groceries, but he had married her when she was nobody. He had bestowed his status upon her, and this was how she repaid him, by destroying him. On the 3rd day, a Tuesday, hunger finally forced Mark out of the house. He walked to the public library 4 miles away to use the free internet, as his phone data had been cut off. He needed to find a way to stop the eviction notice he knew was coming. He sat at a computer terminal, the smell of old paper and homeless patrons surrounding him. He typed, "Divorce Laws Washington State," into the search bar. He scrolled past the ads for high-end attorneys. He couldn't afford them. He read through legal forums. And then he saw 2 words that made his heart stop, then restart with a violent, greedy rhythm. Community property. He clicked the link. In Washington State, all assets and debts acquired during the marriage are considered community property and are generally divided 50-50 upon divorce. Mark read it again and again. A slow, manic grin spread across his face, cracking his dry lips. "Assets acquired during the marriage," he whispered. Samuel had revealed her fortune during the marriage. The trust fund might be separate, but the capital gains, the appreciation, the businesses she had managed or activated while they were married, even if the principal was hers, the income generated during the last 3 years was marital property. He did the math in his head. If she was worth $18 million, even if he only got the growth, that could be millions. At the very least, he was entitled to spousal support. She was a CIO. He was unemployed. She had the ability to pay. He had the need. It was a payday. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a lottery ticket he had forgotten to cash. Mark didn't go home. He used the library printer to print a list of aggressive divorce attorneys. No win, no fee. Most were personal injury lawyers pivoting to family law, the bottom feeders of the legal world. He circled one name, Saul Piker. The ad featured a man pointing a finger at the camera with the slogan, "They took your heart, we'll take their wallet." It was exactly what Mark needed. The office of Saul Piker was located in a strip mall between a vape shop and a struggling dry cleaner. The waiting room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The carpet was a shade of brown that seemed designed to hide stains, and the magazines on the table were 3 years old. Mark waited for an hour before the receptionist, a woman who looked like she would rather be anywhere else, buzzed him in. Saul Piker was a short, round man with a comb-over that defied physics and a suit that shone under the fluorescent lights. He didn't shake Mark's hand. He just gestured to a chair that had a piece of duct tape on the armrest. "Make it quick, Mr. Sterling. Time is money, and you don't look like you have much of either." Mark swallowed his pride. He sat down and leaned forward. "My wife kicked me out. She's filing for divorce." Saul rolled his eyes. "Join the club, pal. Unless she's hiding a stash of gold bars, there's not much I can do on contingency." "She is," Mark said, his voice trembling with intensity. "She's not just hiding gold bars, she's hiding an empire." Saul paused, a half-eaten donut halfway to his mouth. "Go on." "Her name is Samuel Vance. She's the heiress to Vance Logistics. She owns Apex Holdings. She has a trust fund worth $18 million, and she hid it from me for 3 years. Saul dropped the donut. He wiped his sticky fingers on a napkin, his eyes suddenly sharp and predatory. Vance? As in the shipping magnate Arthur Vance? Yes. She's his granddaughter. And you're married to her. Legally, yes. No papers have been signed yet. Saul let out a low whistle. He leaned back, the springs of his chair groaning. Jackpot. I want half, Mark said, his fist clenching on the desk. I supported her while she played poor little orphan. I paid the mortgage. I bought the food. She deceived me. That's fraud, isn't it? And since we're in a community property state, I'm entitled to a share of her assets. Saul began typing furiously on his computer. It's not quite that simple, kid. Inheritances are usually separate property. However, he looked up, a shark-like grin revealing yellowed teeth. If she commingled funds, if she used a joint account to pay for a maintenance fee on a trust, if she used marital effort to manage the business, then we have a hook. We can argue unjust enrichment. We can argue emotional distress due to fraudulent concealment. We can tie this up in court for years. I don't want years, Mark said. I'm broke, Saul. I need a settlement. Oh, you'll get a settlement, Saul chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. People like the Vances hate bad press. They hate courtrooms. They'll pay you $5 million just to go away. I'll take 30%. Done, Mark said instantly. One more thing, Saul said, narrowing his eyes. Is there a prenup? Mark hesitated. A vague memory scratched at the back of his mind. A night 3 years ago. Wine. Papers. But he pushed it away. He was the one with the job back then. He was the prize. Samuel was nothing. No. Mark lied to himself as much as to Saul. No prenup. I refused to sign one. I trusted her. Beautiful. Saul slammed his hand on the desk. We're going to eat her alive. The 2 weeks leading up to the hearing were the longest of Mark's life. He lived on adrenaline. He sold his golf clubs to a pawn shop for a fraction of their value, just to buy a new shirt and pay for the filing fees. He practiced his testimony in the mirror of the library bathroom. I was the victim. She lied to me. She used me. He started to believe it. He rewrote history in his mind until he was the martyr of the century. He was the loving husband who had been duped by a calculating con artist. When the day of the hearing arrived, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with rain. Mark met Saul on the steps of the King County Courthouse. Saul looked slightly more presentable, though his tie was still crooked. "Ready to be a millionaire?" Saul asked, winking. "I just want what's mine," Mark said, adjusting his cuffs. They entered courtroom 4B. It was an intimidating space. High ceilings, mahogany benches, and the smell of floor wax and authority. Mark looked toward the plaintiff's table. His breath hitched. Samuel was there. She sat in a high-backed leather chair, looking like a queen holding court. She was 8 months pregnant now, her belly a prominent curve beneath a cream-colored cashmere dress that looked softer than anything Mark had ever touched. Her dark hair was swept back in an elegant chignon. She was whispering to Charles Henderson, the terrifyingly efficient executor of the Vance estate. Behind them sat 2 other lawyers in suits that cost more than Mark's annual salary at TechCore. Mark felt a sudden, sharp pang of inferiority. He sat at his table, which felt smaller, lower. Saul opened his briefcase, which was overflowing with disorganized papers. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Abernathy swept into the room. She was a woman in her 60s, with eyes like flint, and a reputation for having zero tolerance for nonsense. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked over the rim at the 2 parties. "Docket number 4921, the clerk announced. Sterling v. Vance, petition for temporary spousal support, asset freezing, and preliminary custody determination. "Mr. Piker," Judge Abernathy said, her voice dry, "you may proceed." Saul stood up. He buttoned his jacket, puffing out his chest. He launched into the theatrical performance Mark had hired him for. "Your Honor, we stand before you today to right a grievous wrong. My client, Mark Sterling, is a hard-working man who dedicated himself to his marriage. For 3 years he was the sole provider. He put food on the table. He paid the mortgage. He supported his wife with love and devotion." Saul pointed a dramatic finger at Samuel, who didn't even blink. Unbeknownst to him, the defendant was sitting on a mountain of gold. She possessed an $18 million fortune that she deliberately, maliciously concealed. She lived off his toil while hoarding her wealth. And now that she has tired of him, she has discarded him like trash, using her vast resources to get him fired from his job and blacklisted in his industry. We are asking for an immediate freezing of the Vance Trust assets to prevent capital flight and a temporary spousal support order of $20,000 per month, pending a full audit for a 50-50 community property split. Mark nodded solemnly. It sounded good. It sounded right. Judge Abernathy turned her gaze to the defense table. "Mr. Henderson." Charles Henderson stood up. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't use dramatic hand gestures. He moved with the quiet lethality of a man who held all the aces. "Your Honor," Charles said, his voice calm and resonant, "Mr. Piker's opening statement is a work of fiction that would be entertaining if it weren't so wasteful of this court's time." "Objection," Saul shouted. "Argumentative." "Overruled," the judge said. "Continue, Mr. Henderson." "Mr. Sterling claims he was the sole provider," Charles said, picking up a document. "Yet, bank records show that while Mr. Sterling paid the mortgage, Ms. Vance, using a modest inheritance from her mother, paid for all utilities, groceries, and vacations. Furthermore, the Vance Trust is a generational asset established 40 years ago. Under Washington State, RCW 26.16 in Thamwoids LO10, separate property acquired before marriage or by inheritance remains separate. "But the growth," Saul interrupted. "The appreciation is marital." Charles smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "There has been no active appreciation, because the trust was dormant until 7 days ago. However, none of that matters, Your Honor." Charles reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, blue-bound document. "It doesn't matter because of this." Mark frowned. He squinted at the document. "Mr. Sterling claims he was deceived," Charles said, walking toward the judge's bench to hand over the file. "But his memory seems to be selective. On November 12th, 2022, the night before their wedding, Mr. Sterling presented Miss Vance with a contract, a prenuptial agreement." The room went silent. The air seemed to be sucked out of Mark's lungs. November 12th. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He remembered. He had been drinking whiskey. He was panicked about buying the house. He had looked at Samuel, sweet, poor Samuel, and thought, "I can't let her debt ruin me." He had downloaded a generic template. He had made her sign it at the kitchen island. "It's just for protection, babe," he had told her. "So what's mine stays mine." Charles turned to face Mark. "You drafted this yourself, didn't you, Mr. Sterling? It's a standard separate property agreement. It explicitly states that any assets held by either party, known or unknown, remain the sole property of that party in the event of a divorce. You insisted on a clause that waived all rights to spousal support." Charles projected a copy of the signature page onto the courtroom screen. There, in jagged blue ink, was Mark's signature, and next to it, Samuel's cramping, small scrawl. You signed your own death warrant, Mark, Saul whispered, sinking into his chair. You idiot. I didn't know, Mark stammered, standing up. I thought she was poor. That shouldn't count. It was based on false pretenses. The agreement covers known and unknown assets, Judge Abernathy read from the document. It seems watertight, Mr. Sterling. You wanted to protect your $40,000 salary from her. In doing so, you protected her $18 million from you. The irony is noted. But the custody, Mark yelled, desperation clawing at his throat. She's unfit. She's vindictive. I want my son. Charles Henderson wasn't finished. Regarding the character of the plaintiff, he signaled to the bailiff. We would like to submit into evidence the sworn affidavit of Ms. Jessica Thorne. Mark's knees gave out. He grabbed the table for support. Ms. Thorne, Charles read, has provided a detailed account of the affair which began 6 months prior to the separation. She has provided texts, emails, and credit card receipts proving Mr. Sterling spent marital funds on hotels and jewelry for his mistress while his wife was pregnant. Ms. Thorne also testified that on the night of the eviction, Mr. Sterling stated, and I quote, "Get that trash out of my house. I'm done with her." The courtroom was dead silent. The disgust in the room was palpable. Even the court reporter looked at Mark with contempt. Furthermore, Charles added, delivering the final blow, we have security footage from the motel where Ms. Vance stayed that night. It shows her walking in the freezing rain, 7 months pregnant, carrying her own bags. Mr. Sterling did not call to check on her. He did not offer support. He abandoned his unborn child. Charles closed the folder. We move to dismiss the financial claims with prejudice, and we ask for a permanent restraining order. Mr. Sterling is a danger to the emotional and physical well-being of my client and her child. Judge Abernathy took off her glasses. She looked at Mark. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked bored. He was beneath her anger. Mr. Sterling, she said, in my 20 years on the bench, I have seen many foolish men, but you may take the prize. Your Honor, please, Mark whispered. I have no money. I have nowhere to go. You have 2 hands and a heartbeat, the judge snapped. I suggest you use them to work. The prenuptial agreement is upheld. All requests for financial support are denied. The restraining order is granted. You are to stay 500 feet away from Miss Vance and the child at all times. If you violate this, you will go to jail. She slammed the gavel down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Court is adjourned. Samuel stood up. The lawyers began packing their briefcases. Mark stood there, paralyzed. Saul Piker was already gone. He had slipped out the back the moment the prenup appeared, knowing he wouldn't see a dime. Mark watched Samuel turn to leave. "Samuel!" he cried out. It was a raw, broken sound. She stopped. The heavy wooden doors were open, framing her against the bustling hallway outside. She turned slowly. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look happy. She just looked powerful. She walked back toward the railing, stopping just out of reach. "You know, Mark," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear, yet clear as a bell. "I was going to tell you that night." Mark blinked, tears streaming down his face. "What?" "The night you kicked me out. I had the papers ready. I was going to unseal the trust. I was going to buy us a bigger house. I was going to pay off your car. I was going to tell you that you didn't have to work at a job you hated anymore." Mark let out a sob. The reality of what he had lost crashed into him. "No. I loved you," Samuel said, and for a second her voice cracked. "I loved you so much that I was willing to share everything. But you didn't want a partner, Mark. You wanted a stepping stone. You threw me away like garbage." She placed a hand on her stomach. "You wanted to be free of your burden," she said, her eyes hardening into diamonds. "Congratulations. You're free." She turned and walked out of the courtroom. Her team of lawyers followed her like a phalanx of guards. Mark Sterling was left alone in the empty courtroom. He looked at the prenup still projected on the screen, his own signature mocking him from the wall. The blue ink looked like a smear of dirt. He sank into the chair, put his head in his hands, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood the cost of ambition. He had bet against his wife, and he had lost everything. What a tragic ending for Mark, but a glorious victory for Samuel. It just goes to show that when you treat people like trash, life has a funny way of taking you out to the dumpster. Mark lost his wife, his son, and an $18 million fortune, all because he judged a book by its cover. Do you think Samuel should have let Mark see his son? Or did he deserve to be shut out completely? Let me know your opinion in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another dramatic story. Thanks for watching. And remember, be careful who you step on, because they might be the one holding the ladder later. See you in the next video.